I'm Tass Mellis of The Starters.
This is Ben Golliver with the Open Floor Podcast.
Hi, I'm Kristen Ludlow from NBA Inside Stuff.
I'm OG Anunoby of the Toronto Raptors.
Hey, I'm Elena Donon, and welcome to the Double Clutch.
Double Clutch. Double Clutch. Double Clutch.
Double Clutch Podcast.
Hello and welcome to Double Clutch at the Movies, the ingeniously titled podcast that, despite a hugely crowded market, we can firmly say is the number one podcast in the world featuring British people talking about movies specific to the world of fictional basketball. Today, to dribble drive through our pick of hoops-based cinema, I'm joined by designer extraordinaire and basketball obsessive Scott Dillon. How are you, Scott?
All good, yeah, all good. How are you?
Yeah, I mean, it could be worse. To kick things off in the series, we're going to go and try and execute a full court press on the cross-dimensional, intergalactic, extremely 90s world of Space Jam.
What's up, Doc?
I think the first question I should pose to you is kind of removing all basketball nostalgia. Is this movie good?
It's very difficult to remove the nostalgia and the attachment you have towards this film, only because obviously growing up with this film, this is kind of the thing for our generation at least that I suppose got us into basketball from the very kind of get-go.
Yeah, so that was going to be one of my questions. I mean, for non-basketball fans, especially in our generation, this is the basketball movie reference alongside maybe White Men Can't Jump. This is the reference. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so I suppose if you were to ask anyone off the street who, you know, knows nothing about basketball, if you were to ask them, name me a basketball film, the first one surely they'd say is, you know, Space Jam. Michael Jordan is probably, you know...
Yeah, he's the reference point for kind of pop culture basketball, exactly. Kind of maybe outsiders to the basketball world. I mean, obviously, he's the reference point in the basketball world as well. But Space Jam was directed by Joe Putka. Putka, actually, I think is the correct pronunciation, who is otherwise known for kind of only major brand commercials and music videos, which makes sense considering the kind of crossover poppy element of Space Jam. The director himself, weird bit of trivia, the director himself was actually also the inspiration for Vigo in Ghostbusters.
Wow.
Strange. And now if you visualize it, you can definitely see that. But like I said, you kind of have to separate it from serious critique, because as long as, it's a strange fusion of worlds, the Warner Brothers and NBA basketball, and I'm not necessarily going to go into a critical reaction of these movies, because that's been done before, and also sports movies are sort of in their own critical kind of universe, where it can basically be agreed that they can be a bit naff and ridiculous and formulaic to a certain degree, isn't it?
The one film that springs to mind you could probably compare it to in for our day and age would probably be Thunderstruck. So when you look at a film like Thunderstruck, I watched that and did not want to finish it. Terrible film. But when you really think about the concept, it is the exact same plot, apart from the fact obviously there's not Looney Tunes and there's not monsters trying to take talent away from the NBA. But
don't step on the plot, please. That's still to come. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves.
I suppose what I'm trying to get at is the same plot, but done in this day and age with a kind of current athlete, and it stank. Whereas, I don't know, that's where I'm saying is that the nostalgia, you can't really kind of take that away, because it was a pioneer for that kind of, that kind of cheesy basketball film or cheesy sports film in general, really.
Something Space Jam did, and I think is quite important, is it sort of, in a way, some people might disagree, but it's certainly from the UK, where obviously we could get into a whole kind of diatribe of why UK is held back in terms of popularity of basketball. But it sort of push the culture forward in one way. And as long as films do that, sports films do that in one way or the other for basketball fans, then it's sort of worth it. And something that kind of stuck in my mind recently was in an interview, the Moneyball and Ad Astra director James Gray kind of alluded to the fact that if you wrap yourself up in the knee-jerk reaction of a film, so the immediate critical reaction and maybe the long-standing critical reaction of something, it will cloud your appreciation. For example, kind of Vertigo, when it came out by Alfred Hitchcock, was panned by critics. And whilst I'm not saying that Space Jam is the basketball Vertigo, it's something where sometimes you just have to kind of disconnect yourself from critics. And I think it would be fair to say it would be sensible to remove yourself from critiquing Space Jam from a real kind of macro level. What was your first experience of watching this movie?
So I remember quite vividly, actually. It was a friend's 7th birthday. So he invited, I think it was 8 to 10 classmates to kind of come along and watch the film. I believe it was in spring 97 it was released, wasn't it? I think it was 96 in the US, 97 in the UK. I remember watching it, all of us going, and then lo and behold, he gets a basketball hoop as well for his birthday on his drive. So then I suppose you could say that was my first experience of ever playing basketball in, not a pick-up environment, I'd say probably a more loony kind of...
Would you say you've improved since that day on the basketball court?
Absolutely not.
Okay. And so beyond that experience, didn't you, if I'm recalling correctly, did you have Space Jam pajamas or duvet? What was the situation?
I definitely had the duvet set, actually. Also had a T-shirt as well, which, to be honest, I miss still to this day. Very good T-shirt. And
what was the kind of what was on the Space Jam duvet? Was it just the various characters, or was it?
I believe it was actually the front cover.
It was
the front cover, from what I remember. Either that, or it would have been a montage of all the Toon Squad, shall we say?
Yeah. Well, that's what a way to go to bed every night. I mean, I watched the movie at the cinema with my dad. For a kid growing up in the 90s in the UK, I had a relatively unique upbringing in the sense that both of my parents played basketball, and I spent most of the time watching them play basketball on kind of weeknights, and they were basketball fans. So I remember him pointing out certain references, like basketball-laced references that I had no idea about at the time. Actually, as a reaction to the film, one thing that hasn't aged well on my part is that I subsequently became obsessed with I Believe I Can Fly. But the less said about that, the better. Someone that can offer an extraordinary perspective on this is friend of the podcast Dan Gin in Brooklyn, who literally learned how to speak English by watching the movie. Here is my conversation with him earlier this week.
So I have a connection or an attachment to Space Jam, unlike most people, I would have to say. So my family moved from Korea to the States when I was 11. So starting 6th grade, I was actually not really prepared to start school in the States. I had basically zero English education before we moved. So I moved with, no prior English education. Had to just jump into 6th grade with everybody. And shortly after we moved, it was my birthday, and I got a VHS of Space Jam as a birthday present. There are photos to prove it. And, it was kind of my coping mechanism for like going through school, going through a school in a new environment. Learning English was a huge barrier for me right at the beginning. So after kind of struggling with school all day long, I would come home, I'd pop in the VHS, watch Space Jam front to back, rewind it, and watch it one more time. So that was kind of my routine for the first 6 months of being in school in the States. So I literally watched it twice a day, every single day for about 6 months. Yeah. going through a movie like that over and over and over again, you first learn to read the subtitles, and then you learn to read, the words in the subtitles. You look them up, you figure out what they mean, and then obviously there are phrases that you're not going to find in the dictionary. Simple phrases like "what's up," or you know just the most random things that either Michael Jordan or a cartoon character like a Looney Tunes character would say. I'm sure found their way into my vocabulary, or maybe the way I talked a little bit. Um, but literally like things like Moron Mountain, that's an alliteration, right? So things like that I picked up without even realizing what they were, probably. But it really was kind of the perfect combination for me, because obviously I grew up being a huge basketball fan, and then obviously still being a kid at the time, I loved watching cartoons. I loved the Looney Tunes, and a big reason I loved the Looney Tunes was because, at least at the beginning, it was a cartoon I could watch without a huge understanding of the English language, because you can watch it without knowing what they're saying and still enjoy it and laugh at it. But all the little sayings, all the different ways that each character on the Looney Tunes talks, I'm sure I picked up on that subconsciously. Um, Man, I haven't watched it in a few years, but if I watched it again right now, I bet I could probably recite most of the lines as I go along with the movie. Yeah, I really would, because growing up in Korea, NBA games were not something that I could watch regularly. Um, and obviously Michael Jordan is the person, anywhere in the world. If you're growing up as a basketball fan, he's going to be your favorite player in almost every case. And um, it really kind of, I guess, moving to the States, becoming, a student, becoming assimilated into the culture. I think Space Jam probably was kind of the perfect platform to launch off of as a young 11-year-old kid who loves basketball, loves cartoons, and just wanted to like fit in with everybody else, and you know everyone at school, they knew what Space Jam was, so that's like probably something I found a way into conversations with kids at school.
Thank you to Dan for that really quite fascinating take on the impact that Space Jam had on his life. What I need to do now, just for added perspective, is do a narrative run through of Space Jam. It's not going to be flawless. There will be mumbling and bumbling, but I'm going to get through it. If you, for some reason, in the last couple of decades, have not watched Space Jam, it's time now to cover your ears. It was a film that was actually produced in 1996 for a 97 release after Jordan's return from his NBA sabbatical, in which he played low-level professional baseball, which is basically where we enter the main story. Young Michael Jordan, then it goes back in time. Young Michael Jordan gets in some late-night free throws with his dad, who we know played a major part in his life. The below 4-foot child then somehow dunks. He does a full slam dunk, and we're catapulted into the highlight reel using a variety of wacky pranks and making an array of pop culture references. The Looney Tunes, alongside Bill Murray, make a comeback only bettered by the Clippers' win against Golden State last season, and eventually come out on top, largely due to the stretch version of Michael Jordan. Jordan himself is returned to Birmingham Barons baseball field via spaceship, and after playing, he returns to his fellow NBA stars who are inexplicably just sitting in an empty gym chatting about how bad they are. Jordan convinces them to touch a basketball, of course, which they are weirdly hesitant to do, and they receive their powers back, which means we get to see a little bit more dunking, and then using some reverse psychology, the players convince MJ to return to the NBA, and the film is over. I have finished. Was there anything I missed?
I think you actually covered everything. Very impressive.
Now, as every team does before a big game, we're going to the film room. And the film room is where we're going to analyse the play of characters from a coach's perspective and kind of find out if there's anything that we thought the characters really could work on in terms of their basketball gameplay. What about you, Scott? Was there anything that you picked up on?
I picked up on a few things. Not one single screen in the whole game. Not one single screen.
I love it.
A lot of travels, of course. I think there was one where Bugs travelled potentially. I think he took 20 steps before then he transitioned to then, and I think it was an assist to. I think it was Elmer Fudd. But yeah, that was my main take, and lousy defense, obviously in the first quarter from the Toon squad as well. Obviously being down 60 points. So
tell me, do you think if this was in the modern NBA and we had kind of day-to-day media covering this game, would people be saying that Michael Jordan needs more help?
I compared it to how Iverson probably saw his 76ers team in 2001, where it was give the ball to Iverson, move out the way, or.
Okay, right. So if you were to be running the pick and roll with one of the Looney Tunes characters, and you thought, I need this, it was an important play of the game, and you wanted someone to set a screen and roll for you, which character would you choose?
Foghorn Leghorn, probably. I think he's probably the only big body, bar Jordan, on the squad, from what I can think of.
Well, Foghorn Leghorn, you would say that, but he does submit quite easily in this game. But just to go back to your other point about travels, would you say that the lack of travel calls is probably the most realistic thing in this film?
Absolutely. Maybe that was the turning point, because I swear before this film was released, you rarely saw a travel, or the travels were called, at the blink of an eye.
That might be recency bias, but you definitely hear more complaining about how nowadays people can just do what they want there. But something I picked on was also Taz related. I feel as though he could really control his tempo a little bit better.
How did he start? How did Taz start?
I don't know what he did to earn this spot, but he sees the game so well. And he's such he's got a hell of a motor. He moves up and down the court like it's Westbrook, Giannis levels.
Is that who you'd compare him to then, Giannis?
Yeah, he's a real kind of spark plug. But he puts his head down on occasions, and he really leaves that head down. And, he's one of the quickest coast-to-coast players on the court, if not the quickest, as he's shown time and time again. Sometimes it's just frustrating when players like that don't have their head up. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'd probably compare him more to a Marcus Smart. I think he's more of that kind of hustle player, kind of, grit and grind attitude as well. Obviously, probably speedier than Marcus Smart, shall we say. But I didn't see a lot of Taz throughout the whole game. I'm just going to put that out there. Didn't see a lot of it. I think, but maybe that's his role within the squad. Maybe it was that kind of, the kind of garbage man, as they call them.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. The Marcus Smart parallel is quite interesting because you've said that essentially suggested that he affects the game in ways that people don't generally notice. So maybe he'd be a cult hero in the Tune Squad fan base. But something else I took a look at was the play of Bill Murray, who came up with a major play at the end. And that was I know usually heat check refers to scoring, but what an amazing way, in limited sample size, to affect the game like that. That was quite extraordinary. Would you agree?
I'd also give a shout out to Bugs on that as well. The game was nearly thrown away by Lola, who nearly turned the ball over. And then, I think Bugs was there to kind of pick up the pieces and keep the play running. But unbelievable play drawn up by him. To think on the defensive end as well as the offensive end is, puts Murray up there as, someone that could give it a stab in the NBA in this modern age, as a coach.
You just touched on Lola Bunny. Were you as uncomfortable as I was with the sexualization of that cartoon female bunny?
Absolutely. The voice, why was the voice so, I don't know.
She was whispering everything she said. There was kind of like sexy jazz music playing every time she came into a scene.
There was also a lot of howls as well as she comes in.
When she comes onto the arena, a lot.
90s.
Yeah, a lot of kind of eyes popping out, and it's not the most woke element of Space Jam, the characterization of Lola. However, they do some kind of pithy attempt at kind of female empowerment when she kind of says, "Don't call me whatever." I can't remember what it is. Doll, yeah, don't call me doll. That's it. Yeah. So if there's nothing else that stood out in terms of the film room, we're going to go to the coach's review. Okay, you do have something.
I will have one point to say. So I think throughout the whole film, there's a lot of flagrant fouls going on in there. There's a lot. I think that's where you could compare it to the kind of game then to now as well. You know, I suppose if that was in the modern NBA, I think Butkus obviously elbowing the referee, managing to stay on for the last 10 seconds of play. I mean, that would be like a 5-game suspension probably or something like that in the NBA. Probably even
if you're attacking the referee, that's got to be kind of our test levels of suspension.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I suppose when you compare it to, you know, the NBA today where people, you know, label this modern NBA as like soft to, you know, 90s and before.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
maybe that was the turning point for the NBA.
Do you think that the Looney Tunes, when they look back at when they watch the modern NBA, the Tune Squad, so the legendary players of the Tune Squad from the 90s, do you think that they look back in a similar way to the likes of Barkley and others when they complain about hand checking? I don't know if Barkley necessarily has complained about hand checking, but a lot of people have. Do you think they kind of look at the modern NBA and say you can't put dynamite on the rims anymore and it's disgusting?
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that for sure. I think there's a lot of plays in there that, you know, I suppose the modern NBA would look at now and go, well, how come we can't do that now?
Yeah, why can't you put TNT on the rim to block a shot?
Why can't you flamethrower every player and burn them to a crisp?
It's really quite... this league is soft. It's millennials for you, I tell you that for free. Now for an insightful detour into my conversation with Nigel Miguel. After a short basketball career, Nigel became the go-to actor for authentic basketball scenes in 90s movies, working up quite the impressive filmography, including Blue Chips, White Men Can't Jump, and many more. He now lives in his homeland of Belize, where he works as the country's film commissioner, and he kindly took me through his entry to the industry before talking more specifically about his involvement with Michael Jordan and Space Jam. Could you take us through your career in basketball before your involvement in film began?
Alrighty, yes. I started playing basketball at a young age. I was born in Belize, and my family, we moved to the U.S. when I was 6 years old. I was an only child, and basketball was one of the sports that I can play by myself. And you know, my father used to put me out there and just, you know, tell me to play and sort of keep me out of trouble and just, you know, let the time go by. As I got older, I started to find out, you know, that I was pretty good at it. And, you know, it allowed me to get a scholarship to high school, where I went to Notre Dame High School in Sherman Oaks, California. And I became an All-American there, a McDonald's All-American. I got a scholarship to go to UCLA. And after that, I got drafted by the Nets in the 3rd round, and got injured my first year under contract with them, and kind of diverted into playing, you know, a basketball player doing sports stuff in film.
As you mentioned, you were injured, and that meant that with the Nets, it didn't go to plan. Do you feel as though that stopped you from being able to kind of maximize your potential? And do you have an idea of kind of what you thought your ceiling could be as a basketball player?
It definitely did, because while the injury hampered my desire to continue playing, when I got hurt, I found out about the real business aspect of sports. I definitely knew that that it was a profession, and it was a professional sport, and that kind of turned me off, because when I got injured, I felt like a piece of meat or a commodity more than anything, not so much my well-being. But my ceiling as a professional athlete, I would have never been a superstar or a star of anything, but I would have been able to contribute to a winning team. I feel that my overall game could have helped some of the teams that during that period when I was playing. Yes.
Thinking specifically about the movie Space Jam, which we are actually creating a podcast around, how did you become involved with that film?
Well, the thing is, when I was a senior in high school, I participated in an event called the McDonald's All-American Game, and during that game, I met Michael Jordan, and that game highlights the 25 best high school players in the country, and he was my roommate, um, and we just developed a relationship over spending that week together, and it kind of just followed all the way through, through college and through the pros. And I worked with him over the years on numerous Nike projects. And then when Space Jam came up, there was a director by the name of Joe Pitka that I had been working with also on numerous projects. And Joe hired myself and a gentleman by the name of Nate Bellamy to be the coordinator for the film, basketball, technical advisor, casting. And that probably is the biggest and most important project that I've been a part of throughout my 30 years in the industry.
And in terms of importance, do you mean in terms of kind of what it taught you about being involved in film, or you kind of got to wear several hats in the production of the film?
Yes, I I learned everything as far as the how can I put it, the ABCs of filmmaking at the highest level, because Space Jam was a studio film, and at that time it probably was the first animated or motion capture project. I think Roger Rabbit might have been out before that. I think that was the only one. So I got to bring my technical expertise from filmmaking, I mean from basketball, connected with filmmaking, which is also a passion of mine. And I got a chance to work with the greatest players in the world at that particular time, with MJ, Patrick Ewing, Larry Johnson, Grandmama, Muggsy Bogues, Charles Barkley. We had a who's who of NBA All-Stars at that point in that project.
It seems to be kind of common knowledge that you served in certain areas as a body double for Michael in that movie. Is that correct?
And that, yes, that was, I had actually been doing that a few years before, but when I did it in Space Jam, because of all the media behind it, that's when it became common knowledge to everyone. And like, that job got me so many other jobs. I always tell Michael, I said, man, indirectly, you've done more for me than any of my agents could ever do.
Serving as the body double, whilst you did have a very strong and kind of long lasting friendship with him, and you are an impressive athlete unto yourself. Did you feel as though there was a certain amount of pressure being the body double for one of the greatest athletes of all time?
Well, it's interesting you say that you will never actually fulfill what Michael Jordan can do, off the court or on the court. But it was close enough to where that it was passable um, for the movies and for the commercials or the stills. Um, his time is in such demand. Uh, the fact that I was able to recreate or create certain things that were passable to the average eye, speaks wonders for the filmmakers and the commercial guys, the directors, cameramen that we were working with. But if I could tell you a lot of times where you actually think that it's MJ and it's a body double, it would surprise you.
At any point, did you? I know that you played with him when you were a bit younger, but how did you fare if you ever played kind of one-on-one with Michael?
Michael is the ultimate, man. I mean, I competed at the level that that I could do the best. But there was no question. There was never any question who was the more superior athlete.
When it came out, Space Jam, it was quite the success, really. Like you said, it did kind of break boundaries in terms of motion capture and things like that. But what are your memories of seeing the film and the reaction to the film? And did you enjoy it?
Oh, I enjoyed it because of all the fanfare, and we had a huge Hollywood premiere, and those things are kind of like passe now because a premiere, every major film has a premiere, but back then that wasn't always the case. But Warner Brothers went all out because it was Nike, Air Jordan, and their biggest star, Bugs Bunny. So no expense was spared. Um, I can remember seeing so many A-listers at the event. They kind of shut down Hollywood Boulevard, and it was at the Grauman's Chinese Theater. It was a huge event. It was a huge event, and just seeing myself being a part of it, and just knowing what we did to get it to this point, it felt really good.
It's funny you should say that, because last time that I was outside the Chinese theatre back in November, there was an unbelievably convincing body double and trick artist based on Michael Jordan. So that's a kind of strange coincidence. But what does your relationship with Michael look like now? Do you continue to be friends? And when was the last time you spent some time with him?
We continue to be friends. I get a chance to see him once or twice a year doing just different functions. He used to have a camp out in Santa Barbara, and I would always see him there in July, late July, early August. I'd get a chance to spend like a week with him and just reminisce. I didn't get a chance to see him this past year, but I'm hoping to catch a game in Charlotte this year, and then I'll get a chance to see him.
Many thanks to Nigel for taking a trip down memory lane. You'll hear more from him in future episodes of this podcast. Moving to the coach's review. On coach's review, we'll consider whether the coaches in basketball films should keep their jobs. I guess in Space Jam, Jordan is the player coach. And it's also a one-off game, isn't it, where they don't necessarily play a season. But I assume Jordan would keep his job based on this performance if they were to play a season. Would you agree with that?
I disagree. So I look at the kind of team rotations on that front. I think in the first substitute he made, he tried to put on the mouse, who obviously stood up to, I think Blanco is his name, who, within seconds was injured and probably career ended. Yeah. So from that standpoint, obviously they talk about Durant, who's at fault there this year for his calf going. Was it the Warriors overplaying him? Yeah. There is no question in my mind. Right? Achilles, apologies. Yeah. But there is no doubt in my mind that Jordan is to blame here for the Mouse's career-ending injury.
So you think that was... So the Mouse was clearly willing to go on the court. It's a very interesting parallel.
As every player would, though.
Yeah, players want to play. The medical staff may be more at fault than Jordan on this occasion, though. Jordan's a player coach, and the medical staff really need to sit down and say to the Mouse, sorry that we can't remember his name, but need to say, or her name, I don't know, to say, you need to sit this because long-term damage could be done here. And clearly it is, because the Mouse is literally flattened. But it's interesting. You also brought up you had problems with his decision to start Taz. If you were to put together the starting lineup and maybe made some adjustments to the rotation, is there any changes you would have made from what Jordan did?
Well, Do you know a player that kind of went unsung in the game for me was Elmer Fudd, who had one of the best jams in Space Jam, which doesn't go unnoticed, but a free throw line dunk for me over 2 Monstars is pretty impressive. So from that standpoint, I don't know why I didn't start Elmer Fudd. Maybe we can consider him a sixth man, but I think maybe, like as we alluded to earlier, Taz is probably that kind of character who was your grit and grind garbage man kind of role. Maybe that's he's the Tony Allen of the team, maybe.
So interesting thought about Elmer Fudd. I was trying to get my head around that myself because unbelievable performance from him. He's also quite a heat check moment from him.
And it's very similar to Jared Dudley.
Yeah, and the athleticism was amazing. I have a theory, and the theory is: do you think that the close relationship between Michael and Bugs, obviously with Bugs bringing him to the Looney Tunes universe and bring him into the Toon Squad family, do you think that might have played a part based on the fact that Elmer Fudd is constantly trying to murder Bugs Bunny?
That's a very good point. Very good point.
That could be it. Were there any other changes that you thought?
I think, to be honest, that the whole game was driven by give me the ball and move out the way, which obviously might have been Jordan's mentality with the Bulls. But, he didn't use the Toon Squad to the kind of full advantage. And the only encouragement I saw from him is to stay hydrated with the secret stuff. That is about all he did as a coach. I think Bill Murray, to be honest, was the saving grace of this game.
Interesting. So we're going to move to... we've probably already stepped a little bit on it, but...
one thing I will ask...
Okay, go ahead.
Is Swackhammer a coach?
No, he's the team owner. He's the James Dolan in this situation.
I have him on my notes compared to James Dolan himself. Yeah.
Well, great minds think alike. Moving to highlight plays. We've probably stepped on it a little bit. If we were putting together an on-court highlight reel for the film, what play would be atop that list for you?
Are we excluding the final dunk from this, which seems to be the kind of play you'd automatically go to, right?
Yes, I'd probably say that we'd have to exclude that because it would be too unanimous.
So I have a few. Could I narrow it down? Probably. But, you've got... The whole thing was an all-star highlight reel, essentially. Loads of dunks from Bupkis, Pound, Bang. The 360 dunk from Bang in particular was very impressive. With the no-look lob to MJ from Bugs as well. Great play. But I wonder if MJ considers the dunk on Nort in his top 5 ever. Obviously, Jordan's had some huge dunks in his past with his tenure with the Bulls. But, his dunk on Nort, literally slamming it on his head, pretty impressive.
It's certainly up there with the most violent dunks of his time on the court.
It was certainly one of the more violent ones in the film as well.
So what other plays? You mentioned a couple of other big dunks. Take me through a couple of them because I'm blanking.
Well, I think, like I mentioned earlier, the rival highlight play for me, which I will probably put number 1, is the surprising dunk from Elmer Fudd over the 2 Monstars. From the free throw line, which, how has that not been sung about? I mean, it's nearly as as impressive as a Stretch Armstrong dunk from Michael Jordan.
Well, arguably, I mean, the fact that
without much power either, obviously without the whole Looney Tune aspect of it.
And if you think about the dimensions of Michael Jordan and dimensions of Elmer Fudd, and also Elmer Fudd doesn't use any stretchiness. So if anything, it's showing kind of more sheer athleticism.
I mean, a 2'5" Elmer Fudd versus a 6'6" Michael Jordan. I mean,
it's really quite incredible. You know what? You've turned me round. Michael Jordan's stretch dunk is great, but it's the second best highlight of that game. Something that cannot be ignored in this cinematic treasure is the soundtrack. Obviously, I've already mentioned the disgraced ballad I Believe I Can Fly, but the soundtrack featured Seal, Coolio, Barry White, Salt and Pepper, Spin Doctors, and most notably the main theme, Space Jam by Quad City DJs. a friend of mine and childhood Space Jam superfan, Paddy McConway, took me through his relationship with the track.
I suppose my relationship with Space Jam by Quad City DJs started in sort of 97, potentially 1997, Christmas 1997, because I was bought the VHS from Space Jam for Christmas. I watched it first morning of Christmas, like before anyone had got up. I knew I'd got it for Christmas because I asked for it, so I put it on. And
did you unwrap it?
I unwrapped it. Yeah, I unwrapped the first. Like, I didn't. I think I had. I think I got a Game Boy that Christmas as well. So that was the main present. But I knew I was going to get Space Jam because I'd asked for it, seen an advert for it. Thought that's, you know, I like Looney Tunes, and Michael Jordan seems cool. What a mix! And I thought I knew Bill Murray was in the mix at some point. So it just, all the parts came together for me. Hadn't seen the film, hadn't seen a trailer either, really properly. I just saw an advert for it. So I put it on before anyone had got up Christmas morning, watched the whole thing. And the one thing that stuck with me, other than how important Bill Murray was to that game, was just how that song was the perfect way to end that film and to start that film. I mean, I think it might be a bit outlandish to say, for me, it's what got me into rap music.
And you then obviously you took it to school, so tell us about kind of how you took that song to school and what happened.
Well, I used to watch the film quite a lot. So back then, I used to kind of almost fast forward some parts at the end of the film to get to that song. And there's the hook, which in my mind as a 9-year-old child, in my mind I thought that was rap. You know, that was the height of rap for me there. A young white 9-year-old boy like that. To me, it was like, you know, I was like, I've got to learn this.
Yeah.
And I did. I learned. I mean, I say I learned all of it. I didn't. I learned just the hook. And in later years, well, actually, really recently, I realised that's not actually that much to learn.
Yeah.
But in my head, I was like, I am going to impress some people at school with this. And I remember I was waiting. We were waiting in a queue for PE. I was in year 5, junior school, and I started singing this hook. I said to Sherwin, I was standing with Sherwin Hossenzada and Lauren Stewart, and
they were classmates.
Yes, yeah. And I asked them, "Have you seen Space Jam?" And to which their answer was no, which seemed alarming to me, especially Sherwin, because he seemed to watch a lot of stuff. Yeah. He was a big.
His finger on the pulse.
So I started going, well, have you heard the Space Jam song? And Sherwin was like, well, I haven't seen the film, so I haven't heard the song. And so I started reciting it to them. I started going through it all, you know. I said, welcome to the Space Jam. Here's your chance, do your dance at the Space Jam. Yeah. All right. Wave your hands in the air if you feel fine. We're going to take this into overdrive. Overtime. Welcome to the Space Jam. I'm rusty.
You need to brush up.
I need to brush up. I mean, I had it nailed though. I didn't mess up with them. Yeah. And their reaction, I'll never forget it. Complete indifference. And
but it meant something to you.
It meant something to me, and I'd like to think as well that it meant something to them.
Yeah.
You know. I think it was one of those slow burners. I think they'd, in a few later life, they'll go back and think, maybe I'll give Space Jam a go. But I think, to be honest, you look at that film and there's a lot of pluses it ticks a lot of boxes for me. Entertainment, humour, music. And when you think about the greatest scores, like classical scores, movie scores, I don't think Space Jam by Quad City DJs gets enough adulation.
Thank you very much to Paddy McConway for your thoughtful and reflective contribution. Going to talk about this, and this might be the most obvious one of this Double Clutch at the Movie series. But if we were to think of the Encore MVP, who sticks out?
Surely it has to be MJ.
Of course. Yeah, it's Michael Jordan is the unanimous MVP in this one.
So if we were to exclude MJ?
It's hard because usually the MVP goes to the winning team, so you have to stay on the winning team. You can't choose a Monstar. Okay. For me, I wouldn't choose a Monstar just solely because, generally speaking, the winner gets the MVP.
Bill Murray?
You can't. There's just not enough. It's a great play, but it really just isn't enough. I can't think of anyone else but Michael Jordan. There's no Pippen in this.
There is no Pippen in this, absolutely not.
There's no Rodman in this. There's probably not even a Steve Kerr in this. So probably more so than any film that we're going to cover going forward to pick anyone else but the one and only GOAT, Michael Jordan. What about the worst on-court performer?
This was easy. This was very easy. So, as you alluded to there about the Looney Tunes all stank the place out. So you really could pick any of them. Taz obviously starting was very questionable. Daffy didn't really play much of a role. Obviously, he played a huge defensive play in the end, 10 seconds. Bugs as well got the starting nod. However, the worst player was Blanco for the Monstars. Mm-hmm. So he didn't score a single basket in the whole game, number one. He was at the tip with Jordan. So I'm going to put Blanco as probably, what would it be fair to say, 10 foot tall?
Yeah, I'd say so. So a tiny bit bigger than Sean Bradley, who he's obviously got the powers of. Yeah.
Yeah. To then compare to a 6'6" Michael Jordan at the tip and loses the tip.
Yeah, that's awful. That is...
When you really consider that, that is, and to have Sean Bradley's talents as well versus the Toon Squad, unforgivable.
Let's talk about another MVP, the on-screen MVP. In terms of dramatic ability, who do you think delivers the best performance in the movie?
So I've got down Jordan because of the screen time. I suppose he's okay. He's not great, but he's I suppose in every scene essentially in the film.
Yes, but screen time doesn't necessarily spell acting ability, does it?
So if we're talking about acting ability, all right, Wayne Knight, Bill Murray excluded, right? Of course. But I would say I suppose we've got to talk about the starting five for the Monstars and the NBA. I'd say Charles Barkley out of those five.
Barkley's good. You can tell with Barkley in this film, you can tell that he's the one who's kind of just got it, which is why now he's such a major figure in entertainment, basically. I don't want to use a wrestling term, but in the sports entertainment kind of universe, I guess. But I'm curious, why did you feel as though you could exclude Bill Murray and Wayne Knight, the two accomplished actors in here?
Well, you're comparing them to NBA stars who do not do that for a living, which is why I'd say exclude them. Why are you saying there were bad performances from Murray?
No. I'm saying that they obviously are the on-screen MVPs, but it's between the two for me. I mean, you get I haven't done enough research here in this. I think it's Patricia Clarkson.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's weird. I haven't even got that written down. With from Everybody Loves Raymond, and also Dan Castanella, who is Homer Simpson, is next to her, but they have a tiny part in this film. And I think that the easy answer has to be Bill Murray, but because he's so funny in it, and he's got that kind of, it's in peak Bill Murray time, the 90s the 90s and 80s, Bill Murray was just on another level in terms of charisma. And from that very golf scene, you're like, okay, this is a film with actual actors in it now, and it feels like I'm actually at the cinema, or watching an actual proper Hollywood production, because the charisma of Bill Murray is carrying this scene. However, Wayne Knight, you know what, I'm reversing it. Wayne Knight is the on-screen MVP here, because he does a lot of heavy lifting in this. Would you agree with that?
He does. Does he just play Newman?
That's it. But that's the thing. He's always the kind of.
Did he play more roles than Jurassic Park, Seinfeld?
Well, yeah. He's 100% one of those guys where you kind of see him on screen and you're like, oh yeah, I know that guy. But for me, like I said, he does a lot of the heavy lifting. He heads up pretty much most of the comic relief, with an energetic performance that, whilst quite irritating, and as you said, previously tread on in his other performances, such as Jurassic Park, where he just plays that kind of buffoon, super frantic buffoon character in every film that he's in. But it's an admirable energy. Like, I couldn't do that on the screen in front of other people. And as I know...
And the legend as well.
The legend's good, but I'm going to touch on the legend in a moment. But the funniest moment in the entire film is Wayne Knight. Is that fair to say, when he's playing golf? No, sorry, when the golfers come up to him and he's trying to find Bugs and MJ... after actually MJ went through that hole. I
mean, there's a couple of one-liners from Murray that still, for me, the whole "Larry is clear," which is great. No, I'd agree. The fixing a divot scene.
Yeah, that is so. Just without being able to play this, because I'm so worried about film rights being put on a podcast. Yeah. Oh God, boy howdy do they listen to the Double Clutch podcast. So the fixing a divot bit, they come up to him, an old golfer comes over to him, and basically he's dug the biggest hole in the world trying to find Michael Jordan after he went through the hole, which makes no sense. That's fine, it's Space Jam. And he comes over and he says, what are you doing? And if you've ever been on a golf course and kind of people are trying to play through, you kind of have seen this frustration from people, where they kind of stress out about playing through when people are taking ages or doing something disruptive. And on this occasion, he's dug a massive hole, and he says, what are you doing? He says, I'm fixing a divot, and he accepts it and walks off and shouts to his friend, he's fixing a divot, which for me is hilarious.
I suppose whilst we're on the topic of on-screen acting MVP, so whilst I do not consider this extra, shall we say, as an on-screen acting MVP, but you have to give a shout out to Danny Ainge within this as well, who obviously probably requested to bark on about defense and getting back on defense, being in Ainge's kind of.
That's in his wheelhouse. Yeah, I mean, it's a good. You see a lot of players where you're like, oh, it's that guy, and when you were a kid, you wouldn't have kind of looked twice, but now you're like, oh, Danny Ainge is in this. This is a strange thing, because usually he's just kind of fleecing teams for their assets. But now we're going to think about something we've kind of already touched upon a little bit, but worst on-screen performer. There's a checkered history of basketball players acting on the silver screen. So who do you think is the most obviously challenged in terms of dramatic chops?
So yeah, I could go either way with these two, but I lean towards one more than the other. But one of them, Sean Bradley, just, the others had more conviction in their lines and what they were saying. I think they got given better lines as well, to be honest. But I have to give the nod to worst acting performance to, unfortunately, pains me to say, one of my heroes, Larry Legend. Larry Bird has had now 2 opportunities, from what I can recall, of being on the big screen. And he seemed to just not give it in this as much as Blue Chips.
See, the thing is, I'm not necessarily sure I agree. I went into it and I was thinking, because I've seen Blue Chips, and I went into Space Jam and rewatching this recently, ready to think that. I basically had my opinion ready, thinking Larry's going to be the worst performance, because he's that guy, isn't he? He's that guy who doesn't seem to want any of this bullshit. He just wanted to play basketball. Seems like a shy guy. But he seems to be pretty keen to get in front of a camera quite often. And towards the end, there's a bit where he kind of laughs at Bill Murray being a bit deluded.
He can't play.
Yeah. And at the start, I remember thinking he was going to be the worst, but I think Sean Bradley might be the worst. And to a certain degree, my ultimate, I think Patrick Ewing's also pretty wooden. He might be one of the most wooden ones. But
even when they talk about his erectile dysfunction, I believe it's...
Yeah, I think it's alluding to his erectile dysfunction when he sits down. Unbelievably, in Space Jam, Patrick Ewing...
Rated U film?
Yeah, he sits down with a psychiatrist who asks him if he can get his penis hard. Patrick Ewing, of the New York Knicks legend, they ask him about whether he can get his penis hard, to which, of course, he is disgusted. But the ultimate take on this has to be that I also believe Michael Jordan, despite being the star of this movie, may be the worst actor in the movie.
So have you ever seen the behind the scenes of the film at all? I mean, when you look at kind of the setup of it, you know, green screens surrounding him, green bodies surrounding him as well, pretending to be the Monstars, green bodies pretend to be the Toon Squad. I have to give him the nod and say he's done a good job for someone that's never done this, who's done a shed load of commercials, of course, he's had his practice. But I don't know, I thought I would have said Jordan before re-watching this film.
That's a really good point, because he's the only person player who has to deal with that. Wayne Knight has to interact with the Looney Tunes, but he's an accomplished actor. Bill Murray, I think, also has to. But none of the real-life other non-actors actually have to deal with it. So that's a really good point. That is definitely hampering him.
They do, however, have to pretend to have their talents removed from them, from the Monstars, whilst not interacting with the Monstars. You have to give a shout-out to how they performed.
Who do you think was the best, the MVP in acting as though their powers were being removed?
The one that just springs to mind is Charles Barkley. I think he just looks like how he did when he got that DUI, to be honest with you.
And moving on swiftly, going to the Larry Bird point that you made, was he better or worse in this than he is in Blue Chips?
I think worse than Blue Chips, for sure. But however, I mean, do you reckon it ever crossed the producer's mind to maybe think about bringing Larry Bird into the game with Murray? Obviously, both of them being close friends. He was the only one of the golfers that didn't make it to the court.
That's very true. They probably did, but like I said, I don't think he doesn't necessarily. Whilst appearing still, he doesn't necessarily come across as the guy who would be kind of dying to play as much of a role in this movie as possible. And I also can't imagine him dealing with the green screen stuff. But as a continuation of that, is he better or worse than he is in the 80s Converse advert with Magic Johnson?
That might be his worst, but I don't know if that's a production fault, shall we say.
You think it's in the edit?
I think it's in the edit, in the ad-lib.
If you could just do an impression of the line delivery of Larry Bird when he hands the ball to Magic Johnson in that 80s Converse advert, that would be really great.
Okay, Magic, show me what you got.
And moving on from that, I've just got a series of random thoughts. What would really happen now, in the modern NBA, if a selection of stars suddenly lost their ability, what would the kind of take cycle that we'd see online and in the media look like?
Would they point at like playing in protest? Maybe would they point at drug use? I suppose that would be the take.
I think drug use is one thing that came to mind for me. Also, the assumption would be that they're doing it on purpose, right?
Well, that's one thing. Yeah, like protest. They'd almost like kind of want to get traded, I suppose, or bigger for a bigger reason, maybe. Who knows?
Just something I thought of now, and I'm being completely sincere. Do you think that this could be a real life situation for Markel Fultz?
Wow, very good comparison. Yes.
So when someone just loses, I mean, it's something that we've referred to in real life. We've said space jammed before as a kind of as a verb. We've used space jam as a verb because if we kind of miss a couple of shots and you feel not on your game when you're playing pickup basketball, you say, I feel like I've been space jammed. Markel Fultz, who is now at the Orlando Magic, who was at the Philadelphia 76ers, picked with the number 1 pick and crowned as a future star, just suddenly lost his ability. Is there a chance that one of the nerd looks, ahead of the release of Space Jam 2, could have flown up his nostrils?
Hot take as well. Could he be in Space Jam 2? Is this maybe a big 3-year long plan to maybe get Space Jam 2 under?
Could his massively financially restrictive, underwhelming start to his NBA career, that is a massively elaborate Warner Brothers deal that he's in?
I can already see now LeBron James in the kind of hotel room watching the game, calling Savannah, asking, you watching this? And watching Markel Fultz try and shoot a free throw. Yeah,
I mean, not something many people want to watch, but Justin Quinn of Double Clutch has recently been writing a lot about possible NBA expansion. What do you think a franchise would look like in the Looney Tunes universe based on the sample size that we've seen? Good facilities and a good in-game experience, right? Do you think they'd be competitive in the modern NBA?
No.
Do you think it's would be something that would be considered a major market or one of those kind of small market teams?
I would say they'd be in the kind of top market, but for the very wrong reasons.
Okay, I don't even know what that means, but I like it. So, do you feel as though I'm going to have to physically prepare myself for this? Do you feel as though Jordan is using this as a method of covering up the truth behind his underwhelming baseball career and the surrounding theories around his departure?
Yes. I know where you're going to touch on this as well about, the whole year out, playing very little baseball from what I know.
He played a lot of baseball, but he didn't play a lot of notable baseball, and it was an underwhelming career. If you can ever watch Jordan Rides the Bus, it's a tremendous documentary. But what I was kind of getting at is, look, he did it for very personal reasons. He went, supposedly, he went to go play baseball. Took a year out solely for that reason. The theories out
took
there.
A year out on his... Did he take a year out?
Yeah, exactly. So was it by his own accord? That's another theory, and that's the theories. You can go to Reddit if you want to read these theories. Just put Jordan year out, baseball. But is this almost the perfect way to kind of sugarcoat it and kind of bookend a year out?
Yeah, I suppose people... Yeah, it kind of clouds it, doesn't it? I suppose it's... Yeah, I'd agree.
It's a puff piece. It's the ultimate puff piece. It's a
puff piece.
It's a cartoony puff piece, and it's an ingenious move.
Did we want to talk on as well the whole idea of Jordan's secret stuff? Obviously with... I would never, ever accuse his airness and the GOAT to be, someone who would have been involved in doping scandals of any description. But hot take, was there any form of, I don't know...
You think it was essentially a reference to steroids?
Potentially. Obviously, back
obviously,
then it wasn't as tracked as it is now.
Obviously it's not Michael Jordan admitting to taking steroids. But it does seem as though, from the filmmaking point of view, it does seem as though it's a reference to steroids and PEDs, doesn't it? As I said in the kind of narrative breakdown, it's quite a clever little kind of placebo effect comment about the fact that they all think that it works in the water. Like, kind of strange, but I 100% thought it was steroids, especially when Bugs kind of inflated by like 15 times the size.
If you rewatch the film, though, who's the one that's influenced him not to take it? Till probably the very end, where he kind of thinks, okay, if you guys can play well, then let's run with it. It's Michael Jordan himself. He also says, you guys don't need it. So
you heard it here first. Scott Dillon says Michael Jordan was smacked off his face on steroids. Do you feel as though
that's why he took the year out?
Do you feel as though this film suggests that MJ alone could take on the combined powers of Barkley, Ewing, Sean Bradley, Muggsy Bogues, and Larry Johnson? Well, that's kind of what's happening, isn't it? So the Looney Tunes are fucking useless, right? So they're getting beat by 60 points or whatever, with MJ not necessarily having much of an effect. The comeback happens, yes, like I said, with a series of crazy pranks and unorthodox methods. But for me, if I was Charles Barkley, who was an absolute monster in the NBA, one of the greatest forwards of all time. No question. Sean Bradley, accomplished player in the Muggsy Bogues, accomplished player. Larry Johnson, brilliant player. Patrick Ewing. I didn't even mention him. Patrick Ewing, one of the best centres of all time. If I was watching this film, whilst of course they agreed to a lucrative performance contract, but this Michael Jordan puff piece to cover up his year out is suggesting that if you put a cartoon bunny alongside Michael Jordan, he'd beat an amplified version of those five players. Is that fair to say?
I mean, when you really look at it, of course. Did the other five know?
That's true.
Probably not.
Do you think it was pitched to them as something else? Like it's going to be great, and then you're going to smash Michael Jordan and the Looney Tunes. You'll dominate them, destroy them,
and at the end we'll all just touch a ball. And,
and it's fun. Yeah, it's a happy ending. So that's also something I touched upon in the rundown. Does it make sense to you that they kind of just touch this ball and all of a sudden they're fine? Is that just their powers was being kept in that ball? Remind me, was that clarified that when they gave the when they gave the powers back, it was encompassed in this ball?
So from my memory, they go into... So we're going back, obviously, to when they're at... was it Madison Square Garden? Yeah, they're at Madison Square Garden, and they're at front row. The Monstars, what were they called?
The Nerdlocks.
Nerdlocks, obviously dressed in the suit, swim into the bodies of Barkley, Ewing in Madison Square Garden, and they bring the talents into the ball. So the ball is what contains the talent, which I guess is probably a natural thing to do.
Yeah, I actually think that is the strangest bit of acting in the whole film, is when they put their hands on the ball. And obviously without the graphics, essentially those guys are just going, kind of jerking their bodies around. I wonder how many takes that took. That's something that I would like to know. Come at me.
I wonder how many takes it took Sean Bradley to say, "No way, Jose."
Why are they so reluctant to do it as well? Because my favourite part of that scene is, so they've lost all their powers, right? And they've been through this kind of weird psychological evaluation. The NBA shut down. Lots of really strange stuff has happened to them in the last couple of... Well, actually, didn't they basically get told what the situation was and they kind of poo-pooed it? So a lot of strange stuff has happened in the last couple of months, seemingly, maybe weeks. And when Michael Jordan, their peer and player, fellow player, comes in with a basketball into a gym where they're just sitting there together complaining about how bad they are, and says, "Touch this ball," someone says, "We've tried everything else," as though that is the lowest possible option to touch the ball. Why won't they touch the ball, Scott? Explain it to me.
Doesn't it glow?
So you think it's the glowing that puts them off?
I can only assume. Maybe psychologically they're that fucked from what's gone on with their career and their ability to play basketball. They've tried everything. Maybe they've just become distant with the basketball.
Yeah, they're jaded. They're terrified of the basketball itself because of what it represents. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay. Finally, do you have any thoughts on Space Jam 2 with LeBron James?
I'm interested to see where they'll take it. I'd say as much as I can appreciate LeBron off the court, on the court, I am one of those who is not a fan favourite.
LeBron protractor, yeah.
Yeah. I wonder how they... So when you look at the lineup and who the kind of all-star... I don't know, it depends on the plot, but Damian Lillard, Anthony Davis, Kyle Kuzma, the kind of starring roles next to LeBron James.
Big year for Kuzma. Big year for Kuzma, because not only is he getting this massive role in Space Jam, because, and that might not age well. Because if you look at it and you think...
100% won't age well.
Sean Bradley is probably... That's the weakest player of those, but he's also really notable and famous still because he was massive.
Yeah, 7'6".
He's 7'6", so he was really famous because he's so skinny, and he's kind of... Basketball fans know who Sean Bradley is. There's no guarantee people are going to know who Kyle Kuzma is when people are watching Space Jam 2 in 20 years, if they are, when they're projecting it on their Google glasses or whatever it is. So, big time for Kuzma. Just signed that Puma deal. Going to be in Space Jam. It all feels a bit disproportionate to what he's done on the court. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's maybe low risk for LeBron as well. Obviously, Kuzma's not been to that all-star status that Lillard and Davis have accomplished. But for me, I'm more interested in how does Davis... will this age badly because of the kind of recent pairing of Davis and LeBron? Could end tragically, like how Dwight and Kobe.
Tragically might be the wrong word, but yeah, if it doesn't work, they don't get the championship because it seems to be a championship for bust combination, championship or bust combination. Then it would be considered a failure. And like you said, if it's another Nash Howard, let's do this moment, which I very much doubt because it's a better combination. Then it just won't age well. Because I don't know. We'll see. We're going to have to see. But
the one thing I will touch on with Space Jam 2 is I wonder what Michael Jordan's involvement is with it. He's been confirmed to have a role within Space Jam 2, acting wise. Do you think it's more like the mentor to LeBron, which would be way controversial? When you're talking about who's the GOAT.
Here's my take. Blade Runner 2049. We get to see Harrison Ford slowly run away from an explosion and grumble through lines next. Ryan Gosling is LeBron James and Harrison Ford is Michael Jordan. He's the guy who runs away slowly from explosions. That's my only possible explanation of this. But that is more than enough, Scott. If you made it to the end of this episode, thank you very much for listening. There will be further episodes of Double Clutch at the Movies to come, so make sure you follow us on Twitter at DoubleClutchUK and take a look at doubleclutch.uk for further content. Thank you to Dan Ginn for his contribution, and thank you, Scott Dillon.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Okay, the party's over. Now get in the spaceship. Until next time, farewell.